Hi all together, my name is Georg Roth. I'm working for Westernacher in the corporate communication and marketing department. And today we will talk to Lars. As you all know, we live in very unprecedented and disruptive times. And Lars, in his function, is the global lead for our practice planning. And planning is the right word to start with, because as we face disruptive times, planning gets more and more relevant, more and more important. And that's the reason why we invited Lars to have a chat with him to see what's going on and what can companies do with planning actually, and do they do it accurately already, or is there room for improvement? So how can companies prepare for unprecedented events, for disruptions? This is our main topic today. So hi Lars, nice to see you.
Hi.
Hi. So Lars, I introduced you already as our global practice lead for planning. Lars, could you please tell us a bit more about your work and what you actually do in so-called normal times, so in pre-corona times? What did you do with your team in planning, and what's, let's say, the topic of your business?
Yeah. So what we do in the area of planning at Westernacher, we typically work with the management in the supply chain area to really create agile and responsive supply chains. We are typically working with bringing together the sales department, production department, purchase department, and finance and controlling, and bring them together in one process, and not just looking at a planning process from a, say, manufacturing point of view, but also working with planning from different perspectives. Yeah, and I think that's really what the essence is of a good plan, is that you have all the different points of view, all the different insights into the actual plan. So in essence, that's what we do, and that's how we work with our customers.
I understand. And now, I remember the past 5 to 10 years at least, reading everywhere about disruptions and disruptive times. I think this goes to new regulations, to new technologies, to new competitive advantages, and so on.
Yeah.
And now we face a disruption. I think I'm not wrong to say that probably this is one of the biggest disruptions in, let's say, in the past 70, 75 years. And of course, the question is, are companies able to predict disruptions, or are they able, or do they have much more to be able to prepare for disruptions?
Yeah.
What would you say?
Well, I've just prepared a couple of slides, and these slides are out of our so-called point of views regarding what we typically do with disruption and disruption preparation. So if I switch to this one, I think there's certain disruptions you just can't predict. Yeah. As this COVID-19, I think this is what you would classically call this black swan. It's so rare, it's coming out of nowhere. I don't think there's a lot of companies that can predict and has people that are predicting any pandemic or anything like that. So you have to deal with those disruptions as they come. Yeah. Of course, there's different ways of dealing with disruptions. And there's also a different way to prepare for, let's say, the disruptions that you can prepare for, or that you can predict. Because I think you need to also look at your company and your supply chain to say, well, what could happen? Yeah, and that's, for example, on the right side of on here. I think those are disruption that you can predict. Yeah, that you would have a supplier failure, that you would have a quality problem, that you would have a of course high predictability or high probability and high impact would be if one of your main customers basically start canceling or stops the cooperation with you. Yeah, so I think these kind of disruption is something that you can actually prepare for. It's something that you can have a game plan for. Yeah, and it's also something that you can set up your supply chain so that the effects would not be so dramatic on your company. Yeah.
So it's first of all, it's not as much about trying to predict or be up to date with predictions on, let's say, various events, various crises, but much more to look at your company and to think of where are possible risks, what can I do, or let's say, which risk has which impact on my business. Right? It's a kind of getting a clear view on where do I stand, which are my dependencies, how do I interconnect, what happens there if, for example, drop in demand, as you said, if this goes down, how will it affect my business? So if this is, did I get it right? This is kind of first step to get a clear view, right? Or?
Yeah. So absolutely, and I think the other one is, of course, also to make sure that you get information fairly quick. Yeah. So if you have a drop in demand, for example, it needs to be quickly communicated within the company. Yeah, and not just say kept silent for weeks after weeks that you have a major customer falling out. Same one if you have a supplier where you have a plant. You shouldn't be waiting for weeks to actually start considering that into your supply chain. So a certain reaction time is of course also important. Yeah. So for the things that you can prepare for, do it. You can have certain game plans for that, but also for things that you can't prepare for, like these black swan events here. Make sure that you're not just being too passive. Yeah, so I think you need to start moving and really consider what effect it would be on you and your company.
So we see here different things. I guess these are examples. Quality problem, like several batches rejected or drop in demand, and so on. Is every disruption different? I mean, is there a kind of a common rule for disruptions, or are they all different?
So I think each disruption is different. Yeah, because it's different in case that you have a quality issue. It's different than if you have a supplier failure. But if we look to the literature, is that it's kind of funny. If I just go to the next one here, is that each disruption basically goes through the same stages and is kind of following the same pattern. So if you look here, I just have a little a mouse here. Yeah, so maybe you can see the little red dot here. So basically, phase one is of course preparation. Yeah, and let me maybe switch this to the laser here. So phase one is of course the preparation. Yeah, so in case that you have potential disruption that you can prepare for, the better you're prepared. And if you now look here, you would have the actual disruption event. The better you're prepared, the further you can continue doing business as usual. Yeah. So you're better you're prepared, the better your initial response. Yeah. So you have to do your disruption event, and then here you have your initial response, And that's basically going to help you keep afloat as long as possible. And it's also going to hinder this curve, or how rapidly you're going down. At some point, your let's say your guards are not keeping it up. Yeah. So you have certain buffers, you have certain things that you built in as a resilience into your supply chain. But at a certain point, you can't cope anymore. Yeah. And then the other one is, of course, here, then you're getting your full impact. Yeah. And here, the next one that's important is then to say, how quickly am I to actually prepare the recovery? Yeah. To take actions, to decide actions, to coordinate actions, and then also, of course, implement those actions. And the quicker you are here, the sooner you can start turning things around and then come back in. Yeah. So then you would then start recovering, and then your long-term impact, for example, if you lose a big customer or something like that, is to a certain degree. Yeah. But independent of what the disruption is, it typically follows a pattern like this. Yeah. And it's for you to prepare to do a swift first response and a swift recovery, preparation, and then of course also decisive recovery actions.
For me, this graphic, or what you say, is very, very, very interesting, because it just shows me, okay, whatever it might be, a disruption has certain phases, a certain shape. I mean, it seems to be a rule, but you are not helpless. You are not standing there. I mean, if you take planning seriously, if you prepare, so you have measures to, let's say, flatten this curve up, flatten it up in this term. So you have measures to do something. You are not helpless as a company and just waiting for the disruption or the crisis to be over, but you can do something actively, right? So
yeah. So one of the books that we're reading is, of course, the from the Resilient Enterprise by Joseph Sheffy and Mr. Rice. So I think what they mention is, let's say, how do you build up a resilient enterprise? And they're mentioning the 5 facets of flexibility. So you can the thing is that you can set up a game plan, but it's also to make sure that you as a company is resilient. And if I just switch over here to the next page, is basically to say, well, point number 1 that you need to do to be flexible, yeah, that you can react to change, is what we have here is your supply and your procurement. Yeah. So if you have key suppliers where you can only get those parts for those suppliers, I think you're probably at a risk, and you need to at least cooperate and be very alert with that supplier to make sure that if there's any disruption, anything like that, that you're getting that information as soon as possible. Yeah. So, and I think also you should consider to say, if I only have the one supplier, and it might be that they, from a cost point of view, was selected and they were the cheapest one. Or maybe you want to consider to have an alternative supply and haven't set up your frame agreement, that you have them set up as a supplier, so that in case that things are changing, that you can switch over. Because if you have to suddenly realize, oh, I can't get my parts anymore, you have to switch to another supplier. First, you have to find them. You need to negotiate terms and conditions with them. You need to set them up as a supplier in the system. So you can have weeks going by doing that. Yeah. Where if you had all of that stuff prepared, you can switch over and say, okay, I need more parts from you. Yeah. So I think that's one of the things that needs to be taken care of when you look on your supply and your procurement side. If we look at the second one, right, are you able to actually produce a part in several plants, or you're only able to produce this part in one plant? Yeah. Do you have tools only in one plant and you are not able to switch over to another plant because the tools are just not there, right? Then you might be at risk. Yeah. So you cannot adjust to a disruption, because if you have a flood or something like that at that plant, you can't produce those products anymore. Yeah. So something to take into consideration. Of course, also that the third one is, of course, if you can't produce anymore, what do you do with the products that you have on stock? Is it like typically is first come first serve? So the customers that are ordering first are getting the quantity that they want to the delivery date, and they are just getting those products reserved. Or do you start prioritizing and delivering by fair share, so that you are you're basically keeping the entire market happy as long as possible? What we've seen at many of our customers is, which are suppliers, so in the B2B business, is that as the COVID-19 came, their customers started hamstering. So they were just buying whatever they could get to buffer. Yeah. So that would typically also be a reaction to say, let me get my parts first so I can keep my production afloat. Yeah. So things like that is that you need to take into consideration. Fourth one that we have down here is, of course, then the control systems, right? So we talked about you need to get those information as soon as possible, right? So do you get a feed in case that there's any alerts or anything like that at your suppliers? How do you get that information? Yeah, so that you are aware that there might be a fire at a supplier or something like that. Yeah, are you checking for news regarding these suppliers? Yeah, are you scanning the news regarding those suppliers on a regular basis, right? So that's of course one of these things. And do you have a way to then, when you have those news, do you have a way to actually then simulate that effect? So, for example, if you hear about a fire supplier, you could put the supplier planned receipts to 0, and then basically do an evaluation in your planning system to see what the effects would be of that. Yeah, and what alternatives do we have? So that's important. So to be able to have a system that you can put that information into and actually do the what if. Yeah, or again here with COVID-19, we have customers who are saying, well, we have a maybe a 2 month, we might have till end of the year, or till Q1, and they have to plan with those scenarios and different version of what it could be and what would the effect be. And the fifth one is then the culture, right? So I think it's important to not just keep the information within the department, within the group or something. It's important that we have the culture where you have a process and a way of working where people are aligning their goals, and is actually having a culture that you can make decisions as a company, and that is the best for the company as a whole, and not for sales, not for just production, or not just for finance. It needs to be with all the different drivers being customer service, our profit and production, keeping our employees safe, and you need to be able to talk and wait to actually do that. Yeah. So, if I may, with that culture and that process, Georg, what I would like to do is just to go to one additional slide, which is this one here, yeah, where what we would recommend is basically a lot of companies that we are working with is doing a sales and operation planning process, which is an aligned planning process across sales, production, purchasing, financing, and controlling. And basically, if you have such a disruption, to go in and actually do this on a much higher cycle, or a shorter cycle time, to really go it by days, to say, what is the impact of this change? This is a major one. Then call in for a mini executive SNOP to say, let's evaluate the effects on demand. Let's then evaluate the effects on supply, and then go in and the third day to have when you have your balancing, what are different options, getting the experts on it, and then on day fourth, for example, to say these are the decisions, or these are the recommendations from the expert. Please make a decision. But in that way, you're getting a coordinated decision for the company as a whole, and not a suboptimal decision process.
What I heard before, and for me this is new as an insight, and it's also learning. I mean, we always think like flexibility is something you can have, you have it, or you don't have it.
Mm-hmm.
But if I look at what you showed us and what we were talking about, it seems that flexibility is the answer to disruptions, right? So flexibility, let's see what is the difference, flexibility or agility. But I saw this word, and if I think of it, it's something you have to learn, and it's something you have to prepare for, and you have to exercise and implement. So flexibility is not something, a nature-given ability, but it's something as a company you have to adapt, right?
Yeah. So the flexibility is something that you need to build into your supply chain. Yeah, it's that's nothing that you can do in planning. Yeah, so you need to have set up alternative suppliers. You need to have alternative tools in other plants and all of that. That's something that you need to do ahead of time. There's something you need to do, let's say, in a physical or in your business department. Yeah, the way of talking to each other and actually being able to talk to each other, yeah, that's what planning is about. Yeah, that means that your sales, production, purchasing department, etc., they need to have a common set of data that they are working on, right? They need to have, so the planning is a foundation, and the data is the foundation to actually be able to work with disruptions. If you don't have, let's say, I would call it a common language, yeah. If you don't have the foundation in form of product hierarchies, product classifications, if you don't have customer hierarchies and classifications that is common across all departments, then how you're going to be able to communicate with each other in case disruption is coming? Because then it's all up to interpretation. Well, what do you really mean? Because when sales is saying, well, we have a major disruption in this, say, product category or something like that, and supply then says, well, that category is not what I mean because I have another product grouping or something like that. That's where it kind of starts, and you don't have a common language. Yeah. So the foundation is what planning is about, and the being able to be flexible, that's something that you physically have to do to your supply chain.
And the examples you showed us or you were talking about were like fire in a supplier's plant and so on. Let's say this approach or planning as itself goes also for other disruptions. So let's say as we face now something where we have let's say a loss of demand but also a loss of supply, and production went down to zero in some industries or in many industries. This is applicable also to, let's say, the smaller disruption, which could be a fire in a plant, but also to the bigger ones like a pandemic, right?
Yeah. Well, I wouldn't call a fire in the plant as a small disruption, right?
Okay.
But of course, it's not comparable to a pandemic, absolutely. But the approach is the same. Yeah, you have of course a certain filter. So, your system has a certain level of buffering in, right? So you would always have, let's say, a forecast error. You would always have a lead time variation and all of that, right? And you need to set up your supply chain to buffer that up, right? So that you take a certain, let's say, a standard variation between planned and actual. Yeah. So that's one thing. But of course, when these major disruptions are coming in, that's when you switch from this, let's say, a standard cycle over a month to really, okay, we need to shorten our alertness and our decision making from a monthly basis down to a daily basis. Yeah, and that's when you actually then start going into what we call this mini S&OP process, right? Or this is what Tom Wallace and Bob Stahl from one of their books is calling the mini S&OP process.
Okay, there is pretty much you can do to become a flexible and resilient company and to react to disruptions, to manage and to deal with disruptions, so not to be in a passive situation or not to be helpless.
Yeah.
You can do a lot. I mean, for me, this sounds very, very very convincing, very something you just need as a company. Could you tell me, I mean, stupid question, but why we don't have it more often, or do we have it often enough in companies that they are aware of which measures are to be taken for being a resilient, flexible company who can, let's say, deal with disruptions in a better way?
I think it's definitely a topic, and it's something that the companies are thinking about. I'm not saying that they're completely unprepared or anything like that. They have a lot of examples where they are actively really going for a risk assessment. Yeah, I just think that a lot of times the tools and the heavy lifting of actually getting the data is where it's lacking. So if you have to simulate these kind of things, what we see is there's a lot of times that our customers, when we first engage with them, is actually having the situation that they have to do a week of preparation just gathering data before they can actually start simulating. And it's classically taking data out of a one system, put it into an Excel spreadsheet, and then starting preparing the data so that you could go into simulate scenarios and then come up with a recommendation of what actually to do. So I definitely think that that's one thing that's hindering. And as long as things are pretty stable, of course, cost of production is, of course, one of the main drivers of making decisions on where to produce versus or to say what suppliers that we pick up, right? Of course, cost is one of the major decisions, right? Is the one kind of that's a decisive factor, yeah. And what we see is that the majority of the customers in the beginning are not able to simulate risk. They're not able to simulate opportunities. You could call it driver-based planning. Yeah, they're not able to quickly and without a lot of heavy lifting, data-heavy lifting. They're not able to really simulate these potential risk. Yeah, they're not able to simulate any actual risk to say what would that mean into my entire supply chain, and that's why they're not doing it. Yeah, there's plenty of examples where companies are able to do that, and quite frankly, I think they have a competitive advantage. Yeah, if they are, for example, when we have when we're implementing, it's called SAP IBP. Yeah, when you have your entire supply chain on one platform, and you are able to very, very quickly simulate causes and effects, risk and opportunities, different drivers into your system, and you can see what does that mean for my revenue, what does that mean for my production cost, what does that mean for my employees or my staffing plans, and what does that mean for the financial or the profit side? What does that mean to my suppliers? Yeah, when you have such a platform, that's where you can react more quickly, and I'm convinced that through that also have a competitive advantage, because in case that you have, let's say, a chip manufacturer, yeah, and he has a fire or a tsunami or something like that, if you are quick to switch over to other suppliers' alternative means of supply, yeah, you can keep your production afloat, and to your customers then basically fulfill your customer service, and probably also having more orders coming in because your competitor is not able to supply, yeah, because he was not quick enough. Yeah, so there's definitely an advantage in being able to simulate these kind of things.
So being a flexible company is something you need as an ability to face today's challenges, even such a disruption we face right now. But if I got you right, it's also a tool to identify opportunities also, and also to, let's say, to have a better visibility over your company, and not only your company, but your company embedded in this microsystem or ecosystem of suppliers, of partners, customers, everything, because I think this is today's reality, and there are a lot of risks, and but also a lot of opportunities, of course. Is it the right thing to say, okay, an investment into planning is something highly needed and highly recommended because times will get more disruptive even, but it's also a tool to identify opportunities for your business and to achieve competitive advantage?
Well, disruptions can go both ways, right? Disruption can be you're receiving a major order, yeah, and this is this scenario that we had before with this 800-pound gorilla. It can also be he's saying, I need thousands of parts over the next couple of days, or you lose the business. So, right, it can be an opportunity. Are we willing to deliver thousands of parts, or we will lose the business? Yeah.
I understand.
So of course it goes both ways. And I think it's absolutely competitive advantage when you are able to make decisions as for the company as a whole, taking in, well, what would that mean from a revenue point of view? What would that mean from a costing point of view? What would that mean from our staffing point of view? Profit, etc., etc. And then say, let's make a conscious decision to, for example, let's go for it. Yeah, let's go for those thousands of pieces over the next couple of days. Let's negotiate with companies. You're getting a staggered approach. Well, they can't use thousands of parts of day one. But you need to then take into consideration what would happen to my other customers. Yeah, can I delay them? Or would I lose those customers if we don't deliver there? Right? So again, the first reaction would of course be, hey, this, we'll call it 800-pound gorilla really wants this part, and let's go for it. But does it really make sense? And that's what you're able to make sound decisions. Yeah. And I think that's definitely something that companies need, and they will need it more in the future because things are changing much more rapidly. Yeah. We're not in the 70s, 80s, 60s where things were kind of going on a much more, say, stable basis. Yeah. Things are changing more rapidly, and they will continue changing more rapidly.
So Lars, thanks a lot. It was totally exciting, very, very interesting for me. I think we all learned a lot. I mean, except you. But I learned a lot. I understand planning better. I understand the disruption better. I mean, this curve is really something, it doesn't go out of my mind. But in regarding that you can do something with it. You can really, you can, as a company, you can
You're not completely helpless.
It can go down and you fall and it's dark and it takes long, or you can flatten this curve, you don't fall as deep, and you can also react in a way that you get more quickly through this crisis or other crises which your company faces, right?
I think the only thing you can count on that you can predict is that things are changing.
Yes, change is the only constant. Yes?
Yeah.
So I think this is a nice word at the end.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot, Lars. This
Absolutely.
was really very, very interesting. And I hope we can talk soon on some other topics also, because I think this is a huge topic. I saw just this culture thing and change aspect.
Yeah.
Okay. Great. So
Anytime.
I will be happy to see you soon.
Yeah.
And have a nice day and all the best.
Yeah. Have a good one. See you, Georg.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
See you. Bye,
Bye-bye.
Lars. Bye bye.